Hi, everyone. My name is Geeta Gandbhir, and I am so excited and honored to be here today to talk about the film A Broken House. And with me are Jimmy Goldblum, who is the director and producer, and Mohamad Hafez, who is the film's main participant. And thank you all for being here with me today to talk about this amazing film. I have to say, this is a film that really impacted me personally. I come from an immigrant background, and just the sort of the themes of displacement, of forced immigration, of love, of loss, and also overcoming, and art. It's like it's sort of a perfect amalgamation of so many things that make us human, and it was beautifully shot. So I'm really glad it's out in the world. And I'd love to start with just the two of you, talking about how you got to this, how this story came to be. Obviously, Mohamad, this is your life, but Jimmy, how did you find this story, and how did you two meet?
Yeah, well, thank you, Geeta, for that lovely introduction. And we're so grateful to be here with you today. Um, I actually met Mohammed as part of the research process for a TV show for Apple called Home. And so Home is a series about architects and the ways that they thematically explore notions of home in their work. So our researchers actually surfaced a New Yorker article about Mohammed from 2017. And it was, he was perfect. He was absolutely perfect because outside of the incredible art that he does, Mohammed's also like an architectural wunderkind. Like he had his first skyscraper before the age of 30. And so it seemed like an absolute no-brainer. But an executive who no longer works at Apple actually rejected the story because they didn't think Mohammed lived in a nice enough house. So, and you can imagine the context, right? These conversations were happening at the end of 2017 and 2018. I mean, like the Muslim ban had been announced, it was working its way through the courts. I mean, my wife is a Muslim immigrant from Pakistan. We had a courthouse wedding because we were afraid of her getting deported. Like everyone in our community was terrified and so angry. And like, here's Mohammed with the absolute emblematic story that could speak to so many themes that could be so so humanizing in a dehumanizing climate. And so we were pissed, and I think by like an act of pure kismet, I sort of met the former Congressman Dick Gephardt, who at that time was also just apoplectic about the state of immigration, the way that our marginalized communities were being spoken about. And he really wanted to produce films to be humanizing. And so I sort of brought Mohammed's story over and I was like, hey, would you be willing to do this? And he said yes. And I called Mohammed and I was like, look, if we can find a way to tell your story independently, would you still work with me? And thankfully he agreed.
That's an amazing story, and I mean, for Dick Gephardt, I mean, incredible that he, again, that he was willing to engage in this way, because it's unusual. I think a lot of folks get behind films once they are out, but to be, on from the beginning of the process is amazing. Yeah. So Mohammed, can you talk a little bit about what this process was like for you, to have your work? Obviously, you are an incredibly talented architect and an amazing artist, but what was it like to have your process documented and to work through this with the film team and Jimmy?
I think by that time, thank you, Geeta, for talking to us. I really appreciate it. But by that time, I've been used to media covering the work a lot. So that part, I was, not camera shy at all. But the issue I always had with the media is whenever they would cover the work, they would try to frame me in a certain way as here's a sick, sad, depressed Syrian, and he's building the destruction of his country, and end of story. And he's so sad he locked himself up in the studio. While some of that might be true, but it wasn't always telling the full story of me and the aftermath of the war on my family and so on. And I met Jimmy in a certain period of my life where I was just fed up and I couldn't care less about propaganda and with the media. I just wanted somebody to tell the story in a full way, in an honest way, not filtered. So, um, to Jimmy's credit, they stayed very quiet and stayed in the background. To my credit, I was in my own la la land bubble that I'm always used to, and I didn't make much of it really. They were in the background, and so we all lucked out by having, this genuine Muhammad on the screen. I even don't recognize me when I see the film over and over. Like I was really, really, really relaxed more than I've ever been with anybody with a camera pointed at me. But it just goes to say they grabbed me in a time frame in my life where um, I just, I was focused on my art. That's what I wanted to do, and it didn't matter that I had 20 people pointing the camera and they're sitting a few feet away. It was what it was, You're like, hey, welcome. You want some tea? Okay, let me work.
That's incredible to hear. Obviously it is the job of the team to make you as comfortable as possible and for the process to be as non-invasive as possible. So that's, it's good to know that that's how it worked, and you feel it in the filmmaking. You feel your comfort with the team, which is very powerful. And I'd love to hear, and maybe Mohamad, with starting with you, but can you talk about the fact that it seems a lot of folks, particularly in the West, know very little about the cultural and historical, basically the history, of Damascus and Syria, right? There's a bit of ignorance, I would say here, around what the incredible jewel that that existed and still exists today in that part of the world. So can you talk about that and how you are trying to maybe shift that narrative for people who get to see your work?
Yeah, well, I practiced corporate architecture for 15 years, and back then I was Mr. Corporate, clean shaven, beautiful Italian suits, and long hair. So people thought I was most likely Italian or something. So, and as Jimmy alluded to, I was very fortunate to work on huge projects, very fast-paced, high risk career. Uh, $400 million buildings was the smallest thing we'd ever touch. These were skyscrapers. And as you could appreciate, that world opened to me. It initiated me into a society that a typical Muslim immigrant does not go into, does not get welcomed into this closed circles of higher echelon corporate decisions. So I've heard things that I should have not heard. People were so comfortable around me that I was introduced to a genuine palette of what people really thought about immigrants and Muslims, and so the inside Muhammad of me was a bit in turmoil and was itching to say, yeah, okay, so there's another reality about me that you don't know. I am a Muslim, Syrian immigrant, brother to refugee, and this is my life, and this is our house, and this is how we grew up. No, we don't live in tents, and no, we don't drive camels. We have legitimate, established lives. And you will be astonished to how much of that ignorance you refer to can be out there, and it could be experienced with people with very high degrees in society. Yet, the interest in our region is very limited. I don't understand it. and of course, married to the xenophobic pushback against Syrians and Muslims and immigrants at the time, uh, you find yourself doing the work or swimming against a wave of, misinformation and xenophobia. So I resulted in trusting artwork to build these bridges between humans. And of course, I see Jimmy's film as a beautiful form of art that really just demolishes boundaries and goes beyond walls between cultures.
No, that's beautifully said. Jimmy, I'd love to bring you into this. Can you talk about your frustration? I know I've certainly experienced it with, again, the narrative, sort of the Western narrative and Western filmmaking when it comes to depictions of the Muslim community and immigrants, and how, you with this film, your sort of filmmaking choices and stylistic choices, and how you see this as countering that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I think the thing is that ignorance, the ignorance that Mohamad is alluding to, in my opinion, is by design. Like people spend lots of money to breed that ignorance into our society. And so, and there's reasons for that, because it's honestly a lot easier to bomb a region and extract their resources if you don't see their people as human beings. It's just like, it's much easier to go to war with people who you don't think have family, who don't have culture, who don't want the same things that we want. And so sometimes I get asked, like, what is the sort of driving force of this film? And it's like, there's a lot of things that I'm trying to talk about, but at a root level, I just don't believe in war. And like, I want there to be a film that finds a way to talk about war in a different way. That doesn't need to perpetuate images of violence and the sort of grotesque things that the Syrian people have had to endure in order for you to have empathy. So I was like, how can we talk about this? How can we find a way in? And Mohamad's art to me was the absolute perfect way to build bridges, to create empathy. Because when you actually stand in front of his sculptures, one, if there is a human being in it, they're whole. They actually stand in a reverent sort of pose. But oftentimes what it is that he's taken all humans out, he's taken all sort of images of carnage out, and instead what you're left with is the shell of the home. And it's impossible when you look at it, when you see people's bookcases, when you see their living rooms, when you see their kitchens, when you see the sort of like miniature artifacts of their lives, to not project yourself into that space and to see yourself as them. And so to me, it's really important, because I think oftentimes the only way that we talk about war in this country is either how many people died or how much it costs. And the only way that we talk about refugees is either they're storming the border or they're living in tents. And to me, it's like, I want to talk about where they came from. I want to show that they're like us, they actually gave up a lot to be here. That's how I approached it.
I think that is a very, that's a wonderful and sort of unusual approach, in this time where media is incredibly sensationalized. And, it's about, a lot of times in our industry, unfortunately, it's about the dollars too that the, film might make. So I think I'd love to hear too a little bit about the actual shooting style, because it's visually a very beautiful film. And Mohamad, your art is complex, and wonderful, but also like in miniature, so I'd love for you to tell us about like how you came, how you decided to film the actual artwork, and Mohamad's interaction with it, et cetera.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about the process, then Mohamad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But for me, like, again, when you're standing in front of those sculptures, the level of detail is staggering. Like, there's things that you actually cannot see almost with the human eye, because you'd have to put your head into a miniature sculpture. It's like behind a doorway, there's like writing, and you're like, who is this for? Like, how did you, it's, so you realize that it's all part of this very meditative process that Mohamad has. It's all about this sort of way that he creates space for himself to go into a different plane in order to create these pieces. I mean, Mohamad, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you're doing this for any form of audience, like, because the audience can't see those details. So, it's about something else. And the thing is that, we decided to shoot on film. Like, we shot this on Super 16, and I think part of that was actually just like a spiritual decision, that Muhammad's work is so physical. His process is so physical. The dust tells the story, the particulate tells the story. And to me, it just felt kind of right, in sort of like, in order to honor him and to honor his process, I thought we should also work in a physical way and work in an analog format. And then we also used a thing called a periscope lens, which is essentially a very long lens that allows you to put it right into the models. And those were used in like old Hollywood films when you would build sets of New York and you'd want to throw in the hurricane. Like, that's what that lens was created for. But what it allowed us to do was to bring those models to scale, so that you would sort of break down the world of Muhammad's mind, of his art world, and the actual reality of what was happening in Syria, and just raise some questions about that.
And then Mohamad, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your own process, and also and then the filming of your work, how how that played out for you.
I think my process is so, you have to excuse me, I don't have uh, uh, the filming industry terms, but the way I see it, that my process is very involved and graphic in its nature, because it's very physical. It's much different than my day job, where you're sitting and you're carefully planning and drawing a floor plan and so on and so forth. This is where I am free, and there is no client to answer for or to approve my moves. So I am literally taking a hammer to my artworks and breaking things and sticking things to them and screwing them. And if I don't like it, I unscrew it and breaking it off and so on. And in that term, it becomes very therapeutic for me, but very involving as well, because every single corner for me has a new surprise. And because I am not your typical fine artist, where I am detailing these in a fine brush, there's a big perception out there that I'm sitting there for several hours and just detailing till the cows come home. No, it's my process is, I will throw a bucket of things at the piece, and whatever sticks, I will like it. And so that is an abundance of detail there. So I cannot take too much credit for everything. It's just, I've learned certain processes, how to make things. And these pieces turn out to have their own charisma after a while, especially given that they take anywhere from 4 to 10 months a piece to finish. So, I use materials that age over time, that crack over time, that rust over time. And there are techniques where you can engineer that, but the piece eventually, it will do whatever it wants. How it reacts with these chemicals, how it reacts with these paints is up to each piece. So you see in the film where they shoot me doing things like this, where I am throwing really dust and ash and rubble and breaking the pieces. It's pretty much how I build these things.
It's so, in the film, it's so wonderful to see, it is so wonderful to see that part of it, like just the idea, because you would imagine it differently, you'd imagine it like you're building a dollhouse, and it's very delicate, and it's very rough, and kind of wonderful and visceral. So it's I really enjoyed that, seeing how the work gets made, or how the pieces get made. And then I'm curious to can you talk a little bit, Jimmy, about audience reaction? You've had an incredible run, with this film in festivals, and now you were shortlisted for the Oscar. Can you talk a little bit about, were you surprised by the response? Just what has, this been like?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's because our first shoot was in 2018. Our first shoot was 20. I went back because COVID has just completely impacted my ability to deal with time. And I was like, how long have I been working on this? And I was like, wow, we filmed in 2018. And then we also filmed into 2019 in Lebanon. And it was interesting because we were supposed to have our like big sort of world premiere at Hot Docs in May 2020. And then like COVID just like threw everything into a loop, and it was just so hard. Like we went through basically almost like an 8-month process where the film wasn't getting in anywhere. Like people didn't know what to do with it. And then something happened where we had our first in-person screening at the Palm Springs Film Festival this previous, I believe it was July. Okay. And the thing with Palm Springs is that was the first in-person screening in California. That was the first festival to reopen in California. So, we've all been sort of like locked inside our houses for months on end. And then this film plays, and I was just weeping because I was so grateful to be back in a movie theater. Like I was just so happy to be back amongst community. But I could see that the film was resonating in a different way. And we had a Q&A where there was a Nigerian man from Lagos, whose name was Bayo. He lived in Long Beach here. And I'll just never forget it because he was like, I haven't been home in 40 years. Like my nieces and nephews have their own kids now. And like, no one here understands what Nigeria means to me. And thank you for telling my story. And like, it was just, it was the best. It was just the best. I don't know what to say. Like, it's like it's everything you want to hear, right? Which is that this film can be a way that not just, speaks to a very sort of specific experience, but I think it speaks to a larger sort of fabric of like the immigrant and refugee experience. But then also because we were exploring issues of homesickness, I think in COVID, everyone could relate to it, because here's Mohamad, who hasn't been to, his family hasn't been under the same roof for 15 years, which is insanity. But then all of a sudden, like everyone in the world is missing weddings, everyone's missing funerals, everyone's missing birthdays. And suddenly there's like an empathy that people could bring to the refugee and immigrant experience that maybe they didn't have previously. So it's gotten really wild, like in terms of as COVID has sort of gone on. I think the themes of the film have actually gotten deeper. And yeah, we're very grateful to be where we are, very grateful to be shortlisted and on all these shortlists. And I'm just so happy. Like, I feel like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz or something. I'm like, I have no idea what's happening, but I'm so happy that people are connecting to it.
What's interesting is too, there you mentioned the Wizard of Oz, and the whole theme of the Wizard of Oz was that she wanted to go home. You know what I mean? So it's funny that that's the analogy. Like, that whole story was about her being in this magical, wonderful new place, and all she did was miss Kansas. Even though it was gray and tornado filled. So it's interesting. I think the last question that I'd love to ask you all is I'd love to talk about your family a little bit, Mohamad. And I think one of the most powerful scenes for me in the film was, your conversation with your mother, the meeting with your mother, and the idea that your mother chose to, again, the family was living apart, and she was sort of choosing, because of her, desire to be as close to home as possible, to live very separately from you all. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that and, where things stand now. Are they the same? And what is your current situation like, and your families?
Pretty much the same. Still, my mom is in Damascus as we speak. And yeah, I was just speaking to her a couple of days ago, and I'm back to begging her, like, I'm going to Dubai in a few days, and she hasn't yet decided if she wants to come see me or not, because she doesn't want to leave. So, this is getting old a lot. And what happened in the film is I had internalized a lot of these issues, to have your 70-some-year-old mom leave you and move back to Damascus because she's super homesick. I get why she did it. But then in my shoes, for somebody living in the diaspora, and a lot of sons and daughters of immigrants feel the same way, the fact that we can provide a house, a comfortable life in the West, and cars and health service and whatnot, and still cannot provide that calmness inside helps you, and it makes you feel helpless. Like there's a bit of failed feeling, failure, especially during a war, that's when you would expect the sons and daughters to take the burden and provide, and that's what happened for a few years. But then when things calmed down, there was something that I couldn't provide. The United States could not provide, and she was just way too homesick. And I get it. I get it. But I had internalized so many things, and I'm a very introvert person that I think the team lucked out a little bit by catching me kind of break down in front of my mom, and we caught it on camera. I was just telling somebody like this. I said, I never speak to my mom about these issues. Rarely do, we're a family that don't talk about emotions much. And it is like, focus on your work in America. Everything is okay here. Don't worry about me. Yeah, and you get to a point where you just internalize it. And I'm having an exhibit here in Qatar, and I met so many Syrians, and they keep telling me, actually so many immigrants, they keep telling me that conversation you had with your mother happened with every family. I have had so many people come to me and say, you can't imagine that this is me with my mom. This is me with my mom. So, it's a funny world we live in today. I don't want to get too deep into this because it's going to turn into my baggage, and I have a lot of baggage. So I will pass the mic on to my dear friend Jimmy here, if he wants to comment.
Jimmy, I'd love to for you, I'd love to hear about, that experience for you too, this sort of these intimacies that you were witness to.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if I want to call it like a privilege. I don't know what the right word necessarily is, but I'm very grateful that Mohamad felt comfortable enough to be that vulnerable with us, to be that vulnerable with me, to have that moment with his mother in that way. It's one of those things where, I don't speak Arabic. I was the only person in that room who doesn't speak Arabic, but you don't need to speak the language to understand what's happening, to feel that sort of ineffable energy in a room where you're like, wow, this is really something that is he's really needed to say to her for quite a long time. And I think that, in trauma, a lot of what your energy gets directed to is sort of suppressing, controlling uncontrollable feelings. Like that's so much of life becomes about that. Like, how do I contain the uncontainable? And so I think Mohamad's work and his artistic process is a bit about that. It's to release it in a way that maybe feels a bit more controlled. No one gets hurt in this process. And to take something that feels really uncontrollable in the universe and to make it containable in a studio. And I think that, I think what was happening with his mother is just a different thread of the same fabric. It's that, I can't contain the untruths of this anymore. I can't hold space for not saying how I feel. And I went through that a lot, like navigating a sort of intercultural, interreligious family, my wife being from Pakistan, Muslim, me being sort of Jewish from Philadelphia, American, I'm very familiar with conversations that people don't want to have, but need to have in order to see people, in order for us to really feel safe in this world. So I think Mohamad was making a strong case for his own personal safety and his family. I think he was saying, like, this is what I need to show up, to be with you, to be the son that you want me to be. And I think it's just beautiful that he was willing to say those things, and I hope one day they're properly received, as I hope they will be.
I have to say that conversation felt very universal. I think for anybody from an immigrant background, again, whether you came here by, your family ended up here by choice or not, there's always that question, there's always that thing of displacement and who you are missing and where home is and straddling multiple worlds, and we all have baggage that comes from that experience. So
Yeah.
but it's wonderful to see it validated, to see I think the validation that a lot of folks will feel watching the film in their own experiences is what makes it so powerful in this time of COVID, in this time of pandemic, in this time of, folks being separated, again, so many by what is like an international disaster, makes the film so timely. So is there, and I guess I will ask one more, is there anything else I didn't ask you all that you want to mention that you feel is important to the film? Maybe where you can see it?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I do want to mention is that I would love to talk or just briefly mention what Mohamad has opened in quarantine, because I personally find it very beautiful, is that Mohamad actually quit his architectural practice and has opened a beautiful Syrian coffee shop and cafe in New Haven, Connecticut called Pistachio, where you can see so much of his art, and it's so much of like a little Damascus, and they have Sufi singers come in, and it's become this sort of respite for, I believe, the Arab diaspora in Connecticut, but also for people who want to come and appreciate the culture, learn about it. So he's still building bridges, and I think it's just like, I think it's beautiful. And then yes, also the film is available. You can watch it publicly through The New Yorker on YouTube. But so if you just search A Broken House on YouTube, it's also through POV Shorts. But also go to Pistachio Cafe if you're in New Haven.
Oh my God, that sounds like it makes for a destination. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
My agent, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, this was an amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. And again, the film A Broken House, which is so beautiful. I'm sure it will continue to do great things out in the world. And yeah, thank you for your honesty. And again, just Mohamad for sharing your story, and Jimmy for honoring his story so beautifully.
Thank you. No, Geeta, thank you so much for this conversation. We're so grateful.